they should have kept their mouth shut at that point. If they just continued on sitting with them, that's a very, very helpful thing to do with someone who's a crisis. Just be there. The Western world's answer to it was, we want to control this. We want to do something about this. We want to make something happen.
We do tend to withdraw when someone else is sad because we don't have all the answers and we feel like we need to have the answers.
How can a good God allow that to happen simply to teach the world a lesson? But nevertheless, we have to accept there are certain things where the learning experience of pain does actually help us become better people. If you have any standard of morality, any standard of compassion for people, that you've got to face up to this question. But there is no easy answer.
Welcome to Beyond the Sermon, where we go beyond the Sunday sermon and talk about real questions that shape our faith and everyday life. Together, we'll unpack hard topics, share honest conversation, and explore what it really means to follow Jesus in today's world. Subscribe and follow us to keep up with future episodes. But for now, we hope you enjoyed today's episode.
If God is good and powerful, then why is there so much suffering in the world? And today we're going to unpack that. And I've got Andrew Chisholm with me, who is our senior minister here at City Life Church. Thank you for being with us today, Andrew.
Lovely to be with you, Shelley.
It's awesome. Well, when you first hear the sort of statement about why does God allow suffering, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you?
My mind instantly, I don't know why, goes back to a lecturer I had in the whole area of church history who was talking about the Lisbon earthquake. And it just stuck in my mind. This is back in 1755, Lisbon, Portugal, where there was a massive earthquake. Tens of thousands of people died, young and old, whole families, buildings collapsed in. And that event was a significant event within the life of the Western world at that point in time, of European intelligentsia. And there's a gentleman called Voltaire, who was a French philosopher and scientist, and he wrote a poem about it in which he strongly argues that there cannot be a good God. Now, he didn't completely discard any belief in God, but he basically said God is remote from the world. It's what we call it. He was a deist. In other words, there's a remote God, and he just set the world in motion. It's running like clockwork, and he doesn't intervene to change anything. So that's what's his response to this question of suffering, and it deeply influenced the Western world. In fact, you could argue it's from that point onwards that this question became a very common question for theologians and philosophers within the Western world. Interestingly enough, though, it isn't such a common question within other theological, philosophical and cultural theological systems. So it's not such a common question in Hinduism, not such a common question in Islam, but it's something which has occupied the minds of philosophers and theologians and Christians and unbelievers and atheists in the Western world for well over 2 centuries now. So that's where my mind goes.
And are we able to unpack that just for a moment? Why do you think this is not a question that most Hindus would ask?
Now, I may be overclaiming a little bit here, but in my reading and experience, and those who come from maybe a more Hindu worldview have a philosophical answer to it or a theological answer to it, which is basically the world is an illusion. So suffering is an illusion. So the whole aim there in their worldview, is to escape from that suffering. And you can kind of understand that a little bit if you understand a little bit of, say, the history of Asia and the enormous famines and the oppression and the violence there was in that, which in some ways may have even exceeded the sorts of violence we've seen in Europe or the sorts of famines we've seen in Europe, like the Black Plague. And somehow they came up with a different answer to it. The Western world's answer to it was, we want to control this. We want to do something about this. We want to make something happen. In fact, that's what happened. That was Voltaire's response. We need to be stepping in and helping people out and showing compassion. Whereas in other religious world systems, like Hinduism, like Buddhism, like Japanese religions, it's escaped from the illusion of suffering into a spiritual understanding of the world where we're reincarnated back into something where there is hope as long as we are good people. So it's a very different theological response. And I do think in the Western world somehow our individualism, our desire to control, our desire to be our masters of our universe, and the sense that the Western world did actually have considerable political and control over nations even in history, in more recent history, has meant that we feel we should be able to control the world, and if God's not doing a good job about it, we're going to step in and do it.
Which is kind of a little bit of a Christian worldview, and it's not that God's not doing anything, therefore we need to do something, but it is that Christian mindset where it is, if we do see somebody suffering or somebody in need, that Christians do need to be the hands and feet of Jesus, but not to the point where we sort of reject God to say that he's caused this suffering or that he hasn't done anything about it, therefore we need to. So it's interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think that's why as Christians, or people who be deeply influenced by Christendom or the worldview of Christianity, there's this deep paradox that we face, because we know that the worldview that our forebears had, or the one that we embrace as Christians, says there is a good God. So we accept that, whereas other worldviews, other religious systems don't believe God is good. They believe he's either remote or she's one of many different gods, and the gods are fickle, and so they're always arguing and fighting with each other, or the whole of spirituality, or the real world, what we call the real physical world, is just an illusion. So those types of responses and understandings of that don't lead to the same paradox. But for us as Christians, if God is good, then there's a logical question to ask. Why is there suffering? So the very fact that we at least embrace something of an understanding of a good God leads us straight to that question.
Yes, absolutely. And we have to acknowledge the fact that this is a really hard topic, and we might not even have all the right answers or the answers at all, because it's more than just philosophical. It's also very deeply personal for people, especially if they've suffered a lot, going, hey, why is this happening to me? Like, if there is a good God, why isn't he intervening? But why do you think that this whole idea around suffering and that leading to the fact that there is no God, why do you think that that is the biggest argument or the strongest argument that people sometimes have to reject God or the idea of our God?
Well, I know it is the strongest argument that some people advance.
But not all.
Well, interesting enough for myself, I really didn't believe in God till maybe 22, 21 years of age, despite growing up in a Christian home. And I had lots of arguments against God, but it was never one that I used. I had more of a scientific worldview, and so an evolutionary worldview, a view of cause and effect, and I would look at the miracles and looked at the resurrection, and those would be the things I'd argue with. Suffering was just, well, that's what the world is like. This is what it is. There's pain, there's suffering. My family had experienced suffering, both in our background, going back multiple generations, but even in my own life. I've grown up in India, you'd seen poverty. Those questions didn't, I don't know why, but at that stage of life, I didn't find them so confronting. It was more, did God exist? So I don't know that it is always the biggest question that people ask. It wasn't in my experience. But I am aware there are some people that this is a deeply challenging question. I do think it comes down to what you've said. When you have experienced a deep personal challenge, and prior to that challenge maybe had a confident faith in God, it rocks your confidence in what you believed. And I think that's what, even on a macro scale, what happened in the Western world. There was a confident belief in the goodness of God, which was embedded within all of society across the Western world. And then you have an event like the Lisbon earthquake happens, which rocks that confidence, and people then begin to ask questions. And maybe it's because ones were deeply impacted. This earthquake deeply impacted a whole city in a way which they hadn't perhaps experienced. And so I think crises and pain and suffering does lead people who may have had some form of faith to deeply question God. And it becomes a deeply personal question.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Tim Keller, because we're actually talking about this particular podcast series is out of the book Reasons for God by Tim Keller. And Tim Keller actually says that if you believe in evil and injustice, you're already assuming a moral standard. But where would that standard come from without God? But do you agree that the very act of calling suffering like wrong points to the fact that there is a God? I think it's sort of coming back to that idea of our worldview and having our faith sort of shaken. Whether or not you're a Christian or not, there's some kind of, I think, Western idea that if there was a God, he would be good.
I don't know if it's...
Maybe that's from all of our Sunday school teaching or...
Well, maybe put it this way. I think within scientific worldview, which really comes out of a Western worldview, where things can be explained by cause and effect, they can be explained by, do this experiment and you can see this particular result. So, and where even now the Greek worldview, there's a whole philosophy of logic and deduction. And so we approach questions where we want definite answers.
Yeah.
So if we do have a faith in God and we want to be very logical about it, we are faced with this absolute paradox.
Yeah.
And it leads us to a foundational question. If we believe there is goodness in the world, if we believe that goodness reflects something of the absolute intrinsic nature of the universe, be it God or be it some other force within you, if we believe that, then we are absolutely confronted by suffering in the world.
Yeah.
If we don't believe there's any good in the world, if we believe it's an illusion, or if we believe that gods are crazy, or believe that then it's kind of like you don't have to answer that question. But if I do think if you have any standard of morality, any standard of that compassion for people, that you've got to face up to this question.
Yeah.
But there is no easy answer.
No.
And we want fixed answers.
Yeah. 100%.
We want to know this is what it is. This is what the answer is.
Yes.
With
Absolutely.
a definiteness.
Absolutely. Otherwise, we're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
But that's a Western world approach too.
Yes.
It's a Western worldview of having logical answers rather than just accepting the reality that we live in. So yes, it's a paradox which leads those of us who are immersed in a culture like that, maybe scientific worldview or world of logic, to face some deeply profound questions which don't have certain answers.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't see it as something which undermines faith, but it does undermine our confidence in the certainty of what we see in the physical world.
Yes. Yeah. And there might be people listening today who they may not even know this about Christianity, but we have our God who actually suffers as well, or suffered as well. We have Jesus who suffered on the cross to die for our sins. And how do you think that this changes maybe people's paradigm of who God is and the whole idea of suffering?
I think there's a number of ways of approaching that, because I don't think there's one simple answer to this. You've got to come at the problem from a range of different directions, which then help form a view which I am totally at peace with, wasn't earlier in my life, but a view that there is a good God, and that but He's all powerful as well.
Yeah.
Because He's all powerful, it seems to me entirely logical that we won't understand everything about Him. We won't understand everything there is in the world. This is an exceedingly complex world, and how does a good God balance up all the different things that He's got to deal with or she's got to deal with? Then we have in Christianity a revelation of that goodness of God, where God Himself, in the form of Jesus, enters the world, and without necessarily providing us an answer to the suffering, shows us that He is deeply, deeply concerned. He reveals His goodness, He reveals His compassion, He reveals His love in the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that's where I feel that Christianity does find the most satisfactory answer for me to the problem of suffering. And the answer is not certainty about why, but it's certainty about the goodness of God, and that He has compassion for us, and that He enters into our pain and He enters into our suffering and provides us the means to deal with it.
Absolutely.
That's the way I answer it in my worldview, which I believe is the best way of approaching it from a Christian worldview.
Yeah. And another thing from a Christian worldview is like there's sort of three different kind of things that help shape understandings of suffering that I can sort of narrow it down to. The first that we just touched on, that God suffers with us, like he's there with us, but also that suffering can shape us and actually form our character and part of who we are. Did you want to sort of unpack that a little bit?
Yes, I think it's important not to dismiss the fact that suffering that in the Christian worldview God has allowed, He may not be the author of it, but He's allowed it, can be formative for character.
Yes.
Now, for someone going through deep pain, and there may be some watching today who are going through some deep pain, that's a very provocative answer. That's kind of like saying, well, this is all for your good. It's not going to help them. It's not going to be all help. It wouldn't be helpful to me. It hasn't been at times when I've been in painful situations. But nevertheless, we have to accept there are certain things where the learning experience of pain does actually help us become better people.
Yeah.
And you just have to think of the simple experience of a child maybe reaching out, touching a hot plate. Going to learn from that pain not to do that again.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to dismiss all of that. That is real, but it doesn't fully answer the question.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah. And I don't think that earthquake that you were talking about before, that wouldn't have been one of the answers that anyone would have given with a good outcome.
Absolutely. As I recall, I can't remember all the details, but it's kind of like Voltaire in his book and in his poem was kind of arguing, if you have a young child, neither good nor bad, they're just entered into the world totally innocent and they die.
Yeah.
How can a good God allow that to happen simply to teach the world a lesson? And that's been a question which has been asked in English literature again and again and again. Been multiple examples in the last 100 years where authors have tried to grapple with that.
Absolutely. And that's why it's not just philosophical, it's really personal. So our Christian response needs to be pastoral rather than, pragmatic, which is sometimes how I am.
Let me throw this in here. I may be overreach, but there's a book, Brothers Karamazov, and it's by Dostoevsky. And that's the heart of that book. It's a Russian author. And one of the brothers is a priest, and the other brother is an atheist. And he makes the claim, it's actually, Keller quotes it in his book, Reasons for God. He makes the claim, even if you proved to me that God was good and showed me absolutely everything, I still won't believe if a child has to suffer for no reason.
Yeah.
So, and that confronts at the deepest level, the reason why sometimes we just find this entirely impossible because we see undeserved suffering and we think, how can a good God allow that? I don't think there is a simple answer.
Not at all. No.
But I think the answer comes from the stories that we can sometimes share with each other, and particularly from the story of Jesus Christ. And so when I actually shared a message on this year, that's why the approach I took was not so much trying to give a philosophical answer, because I don't think that answers that, but try and talk through the stories of some people who've been through deep suffering in the Bible, and also reflect on maybe my own personal experience of one time when this was a deep question for me later in life. That kind of resonates with people. That was your question, wasn't it? What was your question on this one?
Well, it's more than philosophical. It's personal. But the Christian worldview, though, has got a lot of hope in it, because it's going. Even though there is suffering, we have a hope that one day that suffering will be defeated and no more.
As I was saying earlier, I think there's partial answers to all of these. Partial answers that sometimes suffering does become a learning opportunity for us, but that's not the full answer.
No.
I think having a future hope can be very encouraging and very helpful. But simply to come to someone and say, well, it's all going to be right in the end, that's not going to be helpful answer.
Definitely not in the moment.
It is one aspect of giving some form of answer to this question. I mean, I think we can trust, based on Christian revelation, based on Jesus coming, dying on the cross for us, then coming alive again, and promising us that he's going to come again and that we'll have eternal life with him, then we know that there is a future and a hope. We know that. And that can sometimes be helpful to people. It's been helpful to me. But sometimes that's the last thing you want to hear, because it's not identifying. You're not standing alongside that person saying, I feel your pain. I understand your pain. Giving people trite answers in the middle of deep pain can be very unhelpful. Absolutely. And just as we sort of come to the end of our discussion, I think just landing on that, how do we then as a Christian response come alongside people who are experiencing suffering and not just have these sort of answers that can help them, I guess, in a moment that aren't necessarily going to be helpful in a moment. But how can we actually stand with people, be real, be authentic, and journey with people who are suffering and who may have these sort of questions going on? I think the book of Job gives both a positive and a negative answer to this. So if any of you have ever read the book of Job, as I describe it, it's a book of questions, 70 plus questions that Job just pours out on God, saying, God, why did you allow my children to die? Why did you allow me to get so ill and sick? God, why? So he just pours out all this complaint on God in 70 questions. And then God replies with 60 questions of his own, so he never fully answers it. Right at the beginning of that story, you have 3 friends of Job who come and they just sit with him. And I think it says it's something like 7 days, they just sit with him. They say nothing. They should have kept their mouth shut at that point. If they just continued on sitting with him, that's a very, very helpful thing to do with someone who's a crisis. Just be there. Just sit with them. Just sit with them in their pain. Not try to answer the question, not to try to give trite answers. They might be good answers, but they're not going to help right then. Just sitting with them. In fact, that follows, as I understand it, a Jewish tradition that when someone's in pain and mourning, you go and just spend some time with them. I've seen this in other cultures. I've seen this in Oromo culture. I've seen this in other non-Western cultures where people don't run away from grief. When someone comes into a place of grief, you go and just spend time with them.
And I think that sometimes in our Western culture, we do sort of tend to withdraw when someone else is sad because we don't have all the answers and we feel like we need to have the answers or have the right things to say in order to comfort them. And especially if they're going through suffering or they've just lost a loved one or a child for no apparent reason. And it does feel unfair and it does feel like, oh my goodness, why would God allow that? Because we don't have the right, or what we think is the right answer, we do tend to pull back a little bit. But that's brilliant to just go, hey, you don't actually have to have the right answer. You don't have to have all the right theological things. In fact, sometimes it is best to just shush and just be there.
Be there, be available, be unavailable. If they say, don't want you around at the moment, but you're still there to step in whenever. That is, I think, a large way towards the best way of helping someone. And then if someone has questions, then you can come in with a discussion, but you've got to be very careful about how you answer those questions because there is no perfect answer to suffering. There is no perfect answer to the loss of a child. There is no perfect answer to the pain and the sickness and the cancers that people go through. But we do have a God who has compassion. And maybe that's, if people did begin to ask me, how do I handle this, Andrew? How do I deal with it? I'd point them towards a God who loves them, a God who cares for them, and my love and care for them, rather than try and provide some answer to the why question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another thing that some people struggle with as well, going, what if they ask questions and I don't have the right answers? And we feel like we need to have answers to people's questions, but sometimes it's actually okay and it's humble and it's better for us to say, I just don't know, but I can come with compassion and understanding.
There's a very wise man in our congregation who's gone to be with the Lord now. And I often remember what he said, is that sometimes we don't know what to say in a situation because maybe someone's spouse has died or they've gone through a very difficult situation. It's not about having the right answers. He said, just go up and just be yourself. Just say something even if it's imperfect. If it's imperfect, that doesn't matter. Don't try and give the perfect philosophical, theological, logical answer, but just be yourself. Express the compassion, even in broken words, even in imperfect words. Just that presence and that indication of empathy is of infinite value, I think, in supporting people when they go through deep, deep crises.